just women are in danger, but all marginalized people, where being uniquely different right now might truly be considered a crime. It seems as though we had all slipped into a false sense of comfort, that justice would prevail and that good would win in the end. Well, good did not win this election, but good will win in the end. So what today means is that we are far from the end. Today marks the beginning of our story. The revolution starts here. The fight for the right to be free, to be who we are, to be equal. Let's march together through this darkness, and with each step, know that we are not afraid. That we are not alone. That we will not back down. That there is power in our unity, and that no opposing force stands a chance in the face of true solidarity. And to our detractors that insist that this march will never add up to anything,
Boston Red here with Friday Java, a weekly magazine of political theory, polling, and commentary. It is part of the history called people that make up this fascinating journey. We are part of the Obama network. For that, we make no apologies. What we pledge to do is give you the facts on a bridge to history. What body politics is, the most up-to-date theories of political science and psephology. Stay tuned for this incredible ride. Boston Red, peace out. Friday Java on the 30th of November 2018, beaming from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. Our friends from the University of Virginia, known as the Crystal Ball, Dr. Sabato's shop, had a conference, so thus they did not publish any of their various polemics, predictions, etc. The guests there, I suppose, tell you what the conference was about. They had Lion Ted Cruz there as one of their speakers, and also Mr. Schaaf, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. He will be the incoming chair of the Judiciary Committee in the House of Representatives. And that's where we are politically. One has to take note that the Political Science Department, the Crystal Ball, Dr. Sabato, they've always been a middle-of-the-road place slightly to the right of center, and much of the politics these days has moved at least to the center, and in some instances slightly to the left of center, that is in the American body politic. That is what we talk about here on WBRN Radio and the Boston Red Network. We have a number of things tonight. Some of it is, or this morning, some of it is house cleaning. Other things are left over from last week that we would put on the week that was, but we'll put it here. We'll start out with the Trump administration officials suggest sharing census data. There will be a census coming up. Responses with law enforcement court documents reveal. This is from the Washington Post. The Trump people have privately discussed the possibility that in future census information could be shared with law enforcement according to documents filed in a legal challenge over plans for the new citizenship questions. That would be in 2020, roughly not quite 2 years off. The subject came up after Democratic lawmaker asked whether responses to the survey could ever be shared with law enforcement agencies, something that has been strictly illegal according to the law governing the census. The census has been going on for a very, very long time, and incidentally, it is a count of all citizens in the, all persons in the country. They don't necessarily have to be citizens. After a congressional hearing in May about citizenship, Jimmy Gomez of California submitted written inquiries about whether the Department of Justice agreed with a memo it issued in 2010 saying the U.S. Patriot Act could not override the confidentiality of the census. In the June 12 email, department officials discussed amongst themselves how to answer Gomez. Question that left the answer open. Lawyers for the Justice Department suggested to acting the Attorney General John Gore, that they were not to say too much in response to Gomez. Confidentiality is considered a fundamental premise of the census and critical to the success of the constitutionally mandated count, which surveys each household in the nation every 10 years, and that confidentiality is enshrined in the Census Act of 1879. So it's been a very long time. In 1954, the Congress codified the rules which say that the Commerce Department, which oversees the survey, cannot share the data with any government agency or court. Violators are subject to up to 5 years in federal prison and up to $250,000 in fine. The law could be changed only by an act of Congress, and given the situation now, it will not be changed before 2020. The Justice Department email was included in a document filed in federal court in San Francisco. That trial will start in January. It appears to leave open the possibility of reconsidering the 2010 memo, which was issued at the time of the first decennial census conducted after the 9/11 episode and the creation of the USA Patriot Act. The Justice Department declined to comment on the email, however the census confidentiality is subject to debate. Acting Census Bureau Director Ron Jarman has blogged about the importance of the count's confidentiality. In an email to Gore about how to respond, Agura said, "I don't think we want to say too much in these cases. I imagine not. But now it is out here, and you've heard about it. Although raising doubts about the confidentiality could have a chilling effect on response rate, Thomas Wolf, counsel with the Democracy Program at the Bureau, at the Brennan Center for Justice, which filed a brief in the current lawsuit, said the Department of Justice does not have the authority to change the rules. The Census Act makes it absolutely clear that individual census response cannot leave the Department of Commerce, and the general census data cannot be shared for law enforcement purposes. Wolf said the Department of Justice has absolutely no say in whether the census data can be shared. It has to follow the statutes like everyone else. He added that the only way these statutes can change is if Congress changes them, and is highly skeptical that a Democrat-led House is going to change them. Instead, Wolf said discussion may have been an example of government officials floating an idea to see if it was workable. You have a lot of floating going on around here. House Democrats have vowed to push against threats to the count. Gomez, who sits on the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, said Monday that the new Democratic majority will do everything in its power to directly address
these anti-immigrant efforts related to the 2020 count. These emails prove that the Trump administration is using every tool at their disposal to vilify our immigrant communities, including the 2000 census. One of the questions they want to ask is, are the respondents citizens of the U.S.? And the idea with the census has been the idea since the 1800s, is a count of every person within the country. It's not just a count of citizens, but every person within the country is what the whole idea behind the count is. Let me just move along here. I think we'll go ahead while we're at the San Diego Union Tribune. We visit them on each broadcast. And what's going on there? Hundreds of caravan migrants began moving to new shelter after a downpour on Thursday. It's interesting. It's cool there with downpours. Thursday downpour turned Tijuana's outdoor immigrant shelter into a mud pile, and by nightfall officials began transporting hundreds of people onto buses to a facility 11 miles away from the border. Conditions have been steadily worsening over the past few weeks as the overcrowded Benito Juarez shelter, which was plagued by serious illness, food shortages, lice infestations, more than 6,000 at the shelter. It's doubled its capacity around 6 p.m. Thursday. Buses began arriving, and officials from the National Commission for Human Rights in Mexico, and a federal agency, urged immigrants to transfer to a new facility about 30 minutes away. Many were weary about making the move. Less than 500 chose to make the trip. Some specifically said they did not want to split up after traveling more than 2,000 miles by caravan from their homes. We're better off suffering here. That is from Samuel Ramos, 22, of Honduras. We all came this way and don't want to go back. Anyway, some people did get on the bus. It's better than being wet. The representatives told the migrants that going to the shelter was voluntary, but the new accommodations would be on the roof instead of outside, and would have electricity and could come and go without restrictions. Heavy rain fell on Thursday at Benito Juarez. Families struggle to shed their sleeping children. And let me move on through this. Early in the day, the Mexican border officials blocked a group of about a dozen immigrants attempting to march to the Mexican immigration office near San Jacinto port of entry. The small group planned to stage a hunger strike until immigrants on both sides of the border, immigration on both sides of the asylum process, demanded the Mexican government move more quickly to issue temporary humanitarian visas, that the U.S. government accept more asylum claims each day, and that the Mexican police stop deporting caravan members. The group originally planned to walk to the border, but they only made it one block before being met by a blockade. Authorities arrested about 45 people from the migrant caravan after clashes. On Thursday, U.S. Custom types said they would not file criminal charges against the migrants, but they still face administrative removal. So they're sort of changing their tune. Very interesting situation there. Normally, I'm looking at this, it's 61 degrees there, which would be a balmy summer in most parts of the U.S., exception of being in Florida and perhaps down in Diego. But this is only temporary. It will dry out. The rains will quit, and things will be more, as they say, conducive But this is just a rainy season, and it normally would be very, very hot there. One of the things that people have to absorb as they move along. Let's us move along here also. We took care of the census, and we incidentally have numbers, man. I'm just looking at Chairman Powell. He's the chair of the Federal Reserve. Jerome Powell. Basically, they'll have probably one more interest rate hike this year. That'll be in December at their December meeting. But basically, they will continue to be accommodative. Said Wednesday he would consider the central bank's benchmark interest rate to be near what they call neutral level, an important distinction from remarks he made less than 2 months ago. Well, that means there's some political influence upon the feds, I guess is a word. And we'll have his speech on This Week in Economics on our Numbers Man channel. I think what we'll do from an editorial standpoint is we will look at it from different ways. In other words, we'll have Chairman Powell, and we'll split it up, and then This Week in Economics by itself, because we do have a lot of economic news, and we don't want to put, I think it's about a 35-minute speech there, period. So we'll do that. While I'm here, let me just one other thing. We'll want to open up here about Amazon and Prime Healthcare. We're going to be talking about healthcare here. This is from John Doerr. He is an investor, an early investor in Amazon. But they will roll out some sort of healthcare program. Speaking at the Forbes Healthcare conference this week, Doerr said Amazon's among the best positioned companies to take information it learns from customers and use it to their benefit, to roll out offering for medical and healthcare products that resemble Amazon Prime, is what he's saying. Imagine what they would be like when he rolls out Prime Health. It could actually happen. Doerr didn't say whether he spoke with Bezos about it or not, but that has been something they've been talking about for a very long time. Now, Google Health also here, despite Google's efforts with an early electronic medical records product that was called Google Health. Doerr sees Alphabet as a player in the market, and he should know he is on the board of Alphabet. He also wouldn't rule out Microsoft. And everyone's getting in the healthcare business because of the size of the healthcare business. He cites online advertising at $75 billion, while healthcare spending is at $3.5 trillion, 50 times bigger. So that is one reason to get into the that part of the business. Now let us roll on here as we move to the meat of our findings here. I think we'll say Bobby Moore is an inmate in Texas to the week that was. We'll just skip that segment and move on to our lineup here. We'll start. This is from the Jackson Free Press in Jackson, Mississippi. In near for racist politics in Mississippi is a question that they're asking. This is at the aftermath of the Cindy Hyde-Smith affair. It started out on the 2nd of November in Tupelo, Mississippi. That was the birthplace of Elvis Presley, the entertainer. But nonetheless, her remarks there in front of a statue of Elvis Presley told a crowd if her friend Colin Hickerson invited me to a public hanging, I would be in the front row. 2 reporters in the audience, which included Wayne Haberford, an African-American broadcaster with WTVA, did not seem to think a whole lot of the comment at the time. Maybe it was a bit crude and frontier bravado. The Tupelo Daily Journal reporter Kermit Bedloom would later write in a Minnecopa column, but reporting of those remarks didn't occur to me. Once the video went virtual on Sunday, many African-American Mississippians and Americans in general, their attuned white allies immediately heard what sounded like the biggest racist dog whistle since Willie Horton of the late Republican strategist and party chair Lee Atwater, the ghost of Lee Atwater, some people would say, a South Carolinian who loved to get fellow Southerners to vote Republican by pandering to racist tendencies and pulling the bigotry out of latency if needed. I dare this white woman talked glib about hanging in a state with the most lynching, the state where black men hung to death in trees were treated like a white glove at a garden party, with children milling about, the state where white people mailed postcards with pictures of horrible scenes to friends and family. Underlining racial tension, catapulted to the surface of the runoff that was between Hyde-Smith and Mike Espy. When a series of other race-related emerged about Hyde-Smith, a joke about voter suppression of liberal college students, photos of her wearing Confederate caps, all of this a rehash. Notably, the revelations indicated that at least the embrace of the lost cause romanticism about the Old South, about upending the usual Mississippi Republican playbook, or at least ripping it open for more to examine and vet what's inside. What that means an intense 2 weeks of national scrutiny, no doubt about it. It revealed what Mississippi was. Republicans, especially Hyde-Smith, who kept hiding from the press, seemed on their heels and worried about the impact of the runoff, bringing both DJ Trump and the Vice President Pence for 2 rallies there before the runoff. That's usually just not done. In Biloxi, and yes, in Tupelo, where hanging commented from a campaign into defensive mayhem. As for the Democrats, African Americans, and their allies of other races, it was an enthusiastic rush with visions of finally sending the first African American Mississippi to Congress, setting up another century of oppressive Jim Crow laws and black codes that happened after Reconstruction. The ghost of Lee Atwater. It was a vicious, misled 1988 campaign that was Lee Atwater was a manager of G.W. Bush's campaign, and our own Governor Dukakis, Professor Dukakis, was running, and then appeared William Horton. And he did get it right here. He chose the case of William Horton, a convicted felon who went home on a Massachusetts furlough program and didn't return on time and committed a robbery and a rape. A documentary on Atwater and his tactics, Boogeyman, shows an ad designed to make Horton look scary to white people. An approach Atwater later apologized for when he was, of course, dying of brain cancer. They even called him Willie, which he never went by. No, he was known as William Horton, at least in Boston. The strategy worked, helping hand Bush to victory, and is still considered by many the Southern strategy of appealing to racist beliefs for votes kicked into high gear, no doubt about that. By the time the hanging tape of Hyde-Smith went live, it was on November 2nd, a series of mailers from the GOP's negative flyer falsely indicating that the opponent was a corrupt criminal were already being distributed. That was Mike Espy. And most racist candidate Chris McDonald, according to state GOP leaders, including the governor Bryant and the chair Lucien Smith. The Mississippi GOP sent glossy mailers daily depicting Espy as a corrupt criminal who doesn't pay his taxes, who can't be trusted. So in other words, they were defining Mike Espy before Mike Espy could define himself. The mailers left the impression that Espy is another black ex-con that the GOP wanted their constituency to fear, just like Atwater framed it when he conceived an attack ad back in the 80s. It's a game of Mississippian Haley Barbour helped Atwater play to bring Southern votes for Ronald Reagan. The campaign for president of Neshoba, for president in Neshoba County Fair, talking about states' rights, near where 3 civil rights workers were killed under a dam in 1964. And it's a game that pushed the conservatives gradually towards the Republican Party since the 60s, with the final transformation coming in a full fruition after the election of Barack Obama. Elections culminated in supermajorities in the Mississippi legislature in 2016. The strategy also laid the groundwork for elements of DJ Trump by the time he kicked off his campaign, saying Mexicans were racist and murderers. The same old racket here. Very long article here. They actually laid it all out. The current rules are simple. Stroke the embers of racism in every white person, probably by associating the Democratic opponent with Barack Obama, or Beanie Thompson from the Delta, or from Clinton, who had long been popular in much of the African American community. Atwater himself explained in 1981 taped interview how racist political strategies have developed over time since the Dixiecrats were yelling the N-word in the 50s to the new Republican Party he helped to create, who instead fixated on or about welfare cuts, entitlements, and we'll get to some entitlements in a minute here, the 1980s, to convey that the wink-wink race-baiting message. You start out in 1954 with the N, and by 1968 you can't say N word. That hurts you, backfires, so you say stuff focusing on busing, states' rights, all that stuff, and you're getting to go abstract. Now you're talking about cutting taxes and all these things you're talking about are totally economic things, and bypassing them is blacks get hurt worse than whites. We want to cut this as much more abstract than the busing, and a hell of a lot's more abstract than inner. Fast forward today, the GOP flyers with lines of omissions or half troops, lies of omissions and half troops, at best accusing opponents of corruption, or Jackson crimes, or African dictators, kids denied pre-existing conditions, etc. Atwater himself, a boisterous figure who ironically loved to play and sing the blues. That's right, he was a blues singer. My generation, he insisted in a 1981 interview, will be the first generation of Southerners that won't be prejudiced. I guess he died too soon. The Republican Party in Mississippi has gotten a whiter since the days when Atwater used to pop into the state for strategy visits and socializing with Jay Mattis, I suppose, a white businessman, longtime Republican, worked for the Mississippi Republican Party in 1980. She remembers Atwater visits a time when more black members were still actively involved in the party that used to be called the Black and Tan Party, due to black support until the real upheavals of the 60s. Now, though, Mattis is backing away from the party because of the visions of D.J. Trump. She voted for Libertarian Gary Johnson. She said before the runoff that she planned to vote for Mike Espy against Hyde-Smith, and may well support a Democrat for governor next year. When he was in Congress, Mattis said Espy reached out to Mississippi Republican Party. He invited the entire delegation to come to his office. He said in an interview there with the polls, he not yet closed the Senate runoff between Espy and Hyde-Smith, as the writing is impossible to know. And this dates back to the last African-American senator was Branch K. Bruce, who served from 1875 to 1881. That was during Reconstruction. From Democrats to Republicans, politicking has long been hot and heavy at Tacoma County Fair. That's in Philadelphia, Mississippi. That was where Reagan set out his thing in the 60s. Racist Democrat Ross Barnett would take to the stage onto the pavilion to play his ukulele and call for resistance against communists and liberals, outside agitators, etc., etc. And let's see here. When a young Republican, 34-year-old, that was Haley Barbour, decided to run against longtime Senator John Stennis. The senator from DeKalb, by then 82, was a segregationist for much of his more than 6 decades political career, although he had softened somewhat lately. He was an old Democrat after all. Barbour was one of the early new Republicans who came of age during the civil rights strife in the 60s, who wanted confused and left behind segregationist Democrats to bring their vote to the GOP. Barbour decided to run against Stennis to start the wave at the Nehoba county affair. Barber introduced the kinds of tricks against the elderly statesman that would hint at the ungentlemanlike Southern political strategy that lie ahead. He went after an old man's age, the morning what would be called Jackson Day. Young volunteers were out to fair early to hug a hug and whatever here. This is and a happy 82nd birthday. Lit candles, as students for Stennis volunteers surrounded to keep them from getting to the senator for the cameras. The point, of course, was to beat Stennis with trickery to show that he was too old. Barber failed, though, and Stennis was reelected. He would die at 93, still a Democrat, but one stuck in the era between the pass of the two parties and a rapidly changing future. So that was John Stennis. That's right, he did die at 92. So he lived another, 11 years. Often when the subject of racism in modern Republican Party comes up, party leaders and supporters will point to the Democratic Party history of slavery and Jim Crow. Well, that was a long time ago. This is a very, very long article here. And it gets down to Charles Pickering. You should call him Charles Dickering. Was a member of the Citizens Council known colloquially as the White Citizens Council, called the Uptown Klan by newspaper editor Holland Carter Jr. His son was in the Clinton administration. Did I say Heidi? Heidi. Anyway. Back to Phil. Brian attended one of the Klan Citizens Council academies. This goes on and on and on here. Very, very long article. It's almost a book. I think we'll have to append this to one of our broadcasts. Anyway, we'll move on here. We'll save this until tomorrow night. And let's go to the entitlement safety net one here. Ohio counties kick people off of welfare to satisfy the feds. Now, actually, we want to do this one first. An experiment requiring work for food stamps. This has occurred not only in places like Ohio, but also in Milwaukee at the end of a strip mall, inside an office with warrants of cubicles. Deetra, I suppose, McBride was back in Rest Care. It's a company hired by the state of Wisconsin to help people who are poor and sometimes hungry find work to avoid losing their food stamps. Boy, did she need help. The $353 the state deposits each month on her Wisconsin Quest card to pay for groceries for herself and her then 17-year-old son. Hadn't arrived, and also recent training to become a nurse's assistant had led McNeil only to a pair of temporary assembly line jobs, which led to prepping vegetables for salads at a Golden Corral. I have no idea there, which had hired too many people and cut her hours to zero. In one cubicle, a case manager for this Rest Care phoned a state agency that had records showing an income for a job McNeil hadn't held for months. In another cubicle, a Rest Care workforce coordinator brainstormed with her about a round of unpaid work experience to test whether she was suited to be trained for a job in a residential healthcare facility, things need to get better. McNeil, 31, said in her there. Wisconsin, with its work requirement, is set to expand next year and focus on employment and training, and is a role model for the Trump administration. I bet it is. Still, part of the push by the administration to compel work by beneficiaries of government programs for the poor. That is on the Department of Agriculture dispatched a letter this month to every governor, prodding them to impose state-wide work requirements on able-bodied food stamp recipients without dependent children, potentially affecting 4 million people in 3 dozen states that do not have them now. Wisconsin is expanding its work requirement for many people getting food aid. They call food sufficiency under Boss Walker, architect of food share changes, I bet. Of course, the boss was defeated, and the new governor, Tommy Evans, has not spoken about food aid, though he said last week he is uncomfortable with the work requirement, but he hasn't done anything about it. It's up to the legislature, which he can't do anything about. Because of the state investment, we are able to provide that support to everyone who comes in the door. That is Rebecca McAfee, who directs food share for the state. Wisconsin is among a growing number of states that have imposed work requirements that were lifted during the Depression, but nowhere else in the country has found as heavy on employment and training programs, relying on outside contractors. Now, this is the scam here. This Operation Rest Care. They are out of Kentucky, which figures. State has a 2.8% unemployment rate in May. Walker and other proponents say this is an ideal time. But one has to understand that when we talk about 2.8, a lot of this is towards the so-called gig economy. The ground level efforts of the rule that began 3.5 years ago are evidence in Milwaukee, where deep pockets of poverty have left the greatest concentration of people affected by poverty. Rest Care received 67,000 referrals from people in the city who must meet the work requirements. McNeil will be one of those now that her child is 18 years old. Since the requirements began, the number of people getting food share across the state had fallen from 800,000 to 650,000 there, and going down. Let's see, 29,000 food share recipients who have been employed in training programs have gotten jobs. That's what they show. This is in Wisconsin. Steve Reinhold, project director in Milwaukee for Rest Care, is concerned about the ripple effects of trauma that can mar the lives of food share recipients, abuse, family members in jail, other bleak experiences linked to poverty. This is what we find. What we are finding is there are other things that are taking priority in their lives, not this. The average wage of a client who gets a job there through the program by themselves at $13.25. What about that one? So let me finish this up here. And we'll get to Rest Share, what it's about. This Quest card was fading. McNeil's hope was fading, just $81 a ride on her Quest card. She didn't know why. When she went to the nonprofit group for work experience in child care, she was told she couldn't enroll because her last job experience had been at a different branch of the same guy. So in other words, they are Mickey Mousing people around here. This is pathetic. Let me get back to Ohio. This is an old article, but it does talk about kick people out welfare to say this is 2015 to satisfy the feds for having lost of millions of dollars in federal monies, not because not enough of its welfare recipients were working. Franklin County, that is Columbus, did what other counties across the state did. It kicked people off of welfare instead of helping more of Franklin County's poorest residents find jobs in the years following the Depression. The county slashed the unemployed from its welfare caseload, threatened with loss of millions of dollars in federal aid because not enough there instead of help. So what they did in Franklin County, Job and Family Services hired these people. Now this spending a little more than $15 million. This is this rescue operation. It's like bringing in a hired gunslinger. Anyway, Jack Frisch, F-R-E-C-H. He was a former longtime director of Athens County Jobs and Family Service, a vocal critic of the process. This is now Care Workforce Services. That's the people out of Louisville. They hired them in Kentucky. The job officials said that's not the case, that they hired Care because of its electronic case management system is better than what the county had. Care has an electronic form that you fill out. I assume you do it on your smartphone. Out a timesheet on a daily basis. That is from Anthony Torman, Director of Franklin County Jobs and Family Services. We know the middle of the month if we are actually hitting our targets or not. Dispatch analyzed a decade's worth of state data, we'll call that big data, found that Care system has been used to remove residents from the welfare rolls in record numbers. Since 2011, a number of adults receiving cash assistance in Franklin County had declined by 71% from 9,153 to 2,636. And more than half of the those decreases had happened since Care took over the county program in 2012. The budget documents show that the county's agency goals to reduce the number of adults on welfare further to about 1,500. I don't know where it is today. That was in 2015. The amount of federal money the county spent on receiving welfare has dropped from 63 million in 2011 to just 36 million this year. Sitting in on a twin bed mattress. This is one. A client here, Hines, said she missed the second day of work at Whitehall discount store. Care assigned her because of her child care center had recommend was closing that day. She was not able to pay her rent. Ended up in a homeless shelter. Workers were connected her with the Legal Aid Society of Columbus and the County Children's Services, which paid for her and her children to stay in a hotel room. Legal Aid got her some money from the Job and Family Services, but most of that had to go to pay back her hotel stay. Finally found a job. Mrs. Hines found a job without the help of the county. Now she works up to 16 hours a day at a senior living facility. She was a victim of domestic abuse, moved to Ohio, and despite the denials, communications amongst Franklin County officials show that their first goal was to meet the federal standard, and this meant removing people from the welfare rolls. And in 2012, the county commissioner there listed on the critical items the number of welfare recipients Care had rejected the previous month. The report said that when an unemployed person is removed from the county's circulation. It contributes to the improvement of the county's work participation record. The report were sent to the state in 2012. Franklin County led the state with 565 people kicked off with cash assistance. Only Cuyahoga County came in close with 492. That is Cleveland, incidentally. And when asked to prove these numbers, Torman said the agency doesn't track these statistics because officials are not required to report them to the state. He said, but the company can't say where the recipients who left work got jobs and what type of jobs they got, etc. Now, this is that, and French doesn't buy it. He's a longtime director in terms of actually helping people get jobs. They are not doing that, he said. It said people who leave welfare because they've got full-time jobs are more likely to be those who were already working part-time and thus already boosted the county's participation rate. So from Kay McGarvey, Deputy Director of Legal Aid Society of Columbus, said the office has more residents such as Himes coming in for assistance against this rest care operation. Rest care kicked one woman off with 3 children after she was late filing a required medical appointment verification form. The reason she didn't meet the deadline was she was in the hospital. I mean, these are the kinds of things that happen out here. Now, let me just roll along here. And this is in the Tribune Chronicle in Warren, Ohio. Idle plant could hurt DJ Trump. This is from Lawrencetown. General Motors is moving to shut down as many as 5 plants in North America. Ohio and much of the rest of the industrial Midwest were vital to the Trump campaign in 2016. DJ Trump blasted the announcement, which will shed 14,000 workers in North America, threatened to cut off federal subsidies to the automaker. Democrats and Republicans in Congress, union leaders are also pressuring the company to keep the plant running in what is now a high-stakes decision. GM said the Lordstown will stop making these Chevy Cruises by March at the cost of 1,400 union jobs on top of 2,700 lost since DJ Trump took office. He promised the people they are all coming back. They are all coming back. Don't move. Don't sell your homes. Well, it's not happened there. It was a kind of promise that endeared Trump to blue-collar workers in places like Youngstown, Lordstown, Democrats and Labor bastions, where he surprisingly won half the vote. The president of Local 1112, that is Dave Green. We don't want a handout here. We want work. Yeah, you're not going to get either one. Only one shift is still working at the GM plant. This is Lordstown. Since the beginning of 2017, some of the work transferred to a plant in Tennessee, while others took buyouts or retired, and this is usually the case. But there's still 700 in the area on layoff. From a labor expert named Arthur Wheaton, I think Lordstown has been on the bubble for quite some time. He's a labor expert. By this time, it feels more ominous for every long-time worker who has been through the shutdown threats and job cuts, because now the entire industry is changing. GM, like other automakers, are moving away excuse me, moving away, where they're moving away from slow selling of cars and focusing on trucks and SUVs. That will only last for so long. And new technology, self-driving cars, electric vehicles, etc. State and local governments are likely to offer tax breaks and other incentives to try to get GM to change its mind. That is from Kristen Dziak of the Center for Automotive Research and Industry think tank in Ann Arbor, Michigan. It's state and local who are going to be able to put the icing on the cake, she said, pointing to the big incentives extended to Foxconn in Wisconsin. We don't know how that is going. All this left workers unsure what future holds in the Mohegan Valley, once a proud steel-producing area. Well, that is not the case. It's like we're in limbo now. That's from Bobby Marsh. She's a single mother who lives in the community all my life, she said there. Well, nonetheless, the old Mohegan Valley is gone again. Let's see here. This is in the Washington Post of Warren, Ohio. It's my business. We are numbers, and many hurt by GM cuts. This was in the Washington Post. We went to Warren, Ohio. We were just reading from that, so we won't spend much time on this article other than to say about Bill McKibben, another Democrat who voted for Trump, agrees and noted that the automobile industry workers have been getting pink slips for decades, long before Trump took office. The situation here is that they're not blaming Trump. There's only one law we are always obeying. That is the law of supply and demand. That is from Paul Nemi, who fixes pallets for a living. Was motivated by Trump to vote for the first time early this year, selecting a straight Democratic ticket. As the economic struggles here in Turnbull County amidst a booming economy. Anyway, this is the notorious Rust Belt. And when every county seems to be getting ahead, attracting new workers and receiving and reviving downtowns. Warren is something like GM's closing in nearby Lordstown will happen to kick it back there. I'm ready and willing to go. This is a great town I grew up in. This is from Shirley Jonko, who was laid off by GM in June and suspects that the corporation was planning the closure for years. No doubt about that. It's sad. It's empty houses. It's something we live with. So some of this is a little bit redundant here. I was told you're playing around with the wrong person, Trump said in the interview with Wall Street Journal. Anyway, GM has been through this before, and GM knows that Trump is a lame duck. One person named Hill, a conservative who voted for Trump, said that overall the president's politics and actions have been good for his village and the manufacturing industry. He said many presidents have broken their promises. Bill Clinton once said he was going to open a Pentagon payroll processing center, creating 7,000 jobs. Never did do that. But these are all one of the big problems. Pentagon processing center was dependent on the military industrial complex, which was cut back, so therefore they didn't get it. I think it probably stayed in D.C. Let's see. They always know what they are doing. That is from Tara Grisp, mother of two teenagers who works the only ship left at the plant. It's a big company. They don't care. It's a business. We are numbers, as she put it out right. We don't matter. All of the big and pleas from this community. It's not going to make any difference. Started with GM in 2000, so she's been there a long time. 18 years in Western Ohio. When the plant closed, she moved to a plant in Indiana, and then about 5 years ago, the plant in Lordstown. Which didn't vote in the last presidential election. She was wise, hopes to transfer to another GM plant, which she would probably be able to do. Well, this is a story here, a sad story in the Midwest. Let's do the sports here. We had a few games in the NBA. The Pacers were at the Lakers 104-96. The LA Clippers, another team in town, 133-112 for the Kings of Sacramento. And in overtime, the Warriors and Raptors, it was the Raptors 131-128. On to hockey. The Golden Knights 4-3 over the Canucks. The Wild and Blue Jackets, it was the Blue Jackets 4-2. And the Rangers and Senators, Senators shut the Rangers out 3-0. The Sabres and Lightning, it was the Lightning 5-4. The Islanders and the Bruins. The Bruins won their game finally in an overtime at that, 2-1. The Coyotes and Predators. That seems like an interesting group. It was the Coyotes 3-0. There was the final. The Blackhawks and Jets. The Jets 6-5 in that contest. The Kings and Oilers. The Oilers 3-2, and that was that. And a little bit of the soccer scores. The New York Red Bulls 1-0 over the Atlantic United PCs, whoever they are, and Kansas City and the Portland Timbers. It was the Portland Timbers 3-2. And the European League, Aston was shut out 1-0 by the Dynamos of Kiev, and the Rapid Vienna's 2-1 over the Moscow Spartans, and we'll just leave it at that. It gets stranger and stranger as we go along. We ran a little long. I'm sorry about that, but we got stuck on the Ghost of Mississippi there, and read more than we really wanted to. It was a very, very long article, but it was an interesting chronology of what has happened in Mississippi, and we can say not only in Mississippi, but it happened in Alabama, and also in Georgia, and in Florida. That is the roadmap. The house that Lee Atwater built is still going on today. How long will these tricks go on? Well, these tricks will go on as long as working people can be bamboozled by a message. And I guess if you look at the numbers, the number of people actually working is a fairly large percentage, although most of them are on large percentage, I should say, are on part-time jobs or in the gig economy, the Ubers of the world, and Uber, Lyft, and all those people. One of the things they are moving as quickly as possible to self-driving cars. They're going to be one of the largest purchaser of these self-driving cars from the GMs and whomever else will be making self-driving cars, the Googles that are making the software in various other places. So once they kick off their beta, or beta, how you want to pronounce it, and get, say, 100,000 cars out there, it will not take very long for them to introduce those into their fleets. And as they phase those things in a few years' time or less, once they get going, the humans will disappear. And it was a big argument, I forget who it was by, but going back to Arthur Lappa, I remember debating Arthur Lappa. Anyway, this is the whole idea that workers that work so-called self types of jobs like this, part-time jobs, etc., only work till their needs are met. Well, yes and no. Depends on how well their needs are met. So a lot of the Uber drivers, a lot of the Lyft drivers only work so many hours to make extra income. Well, the example was the teachers' strike we had in Arizona, in Oklahoma, and in West Virginia, etc., Kentucky, was because these teachers were driving for Uber and doing various other things. In other words, they had a full-time job plus a part-time job and some 2 part-time jobs to do, as President Obama would say, make ends meet. And that is what the labor picture actually is. But they are making those ends meet for the most part. But you're in a moving target. In other words, the economy is not static, it's dynamic. It is continually moving. And this whole manufacturing gig has been, stratagem, has always been very, very tenuous because things are changing. Nonetheless, this will do it for us. Have a good weekend, everyone. We'll talk to you on the week that was. Tomorrow we'll have Uncle Carl. He's back again at the Wall Street Journal. He was over at Fox News, but he's back. We'll have him and the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say. Good day.